in my time as a world builder and a game master, there's one thing that has separated the forgettable and the unforgettable worlds, and that has been the culture of that world. And I'm not talking about just names and accents. It's how the people think. It's what they eat, what they believe, what they celebrate, and what they fear. It's what they fight to protect when everything else falls apart. Hi, my name's Brian. Welcome to the Bearded Nerd Podcast, where I help new players and GMs learn, play, and grow their love for TTRPGs. Today, we're going to be focusing and showing you how to make unique, authentic cultures and societies without writing an encyclopedia or accidentally falling into stereotypes. A lot of homebrew worlds end up recycling the same ideas. Desert nomads, noble elves, aggressive orcs, mysterious monks. You know the list. We'll talk about real world inspiration, storytelling structure, and the one question you should always ask yourself before you design any civilization in your setting. So, without further ado, let's dive into this episode of the Bearded Nerd Podcast. Let's define what culture really is and what it isn't. As you all know or may not know, I was a cultural historiographer studying what made cultures impactful in society and studied how we can learn from it. So this isn't just my opinion. This is based upon my time in academia. So with that frame, culture is not just aesthetics. It's a system of meaning. It's how people make sense of their world. That includes values and ethics, family structure, power and leadership, art, food, the way they dress, traditions, and then beliefs about death, fate, the divine. When you understand culture as a web of beliefs and behavior, your world will stop feeling like a theme park and it'll start feeling alive, right? If your goal is to not build stereotypes, you need to then think of it like building systems. Let me provide you with an example of the dwarves of Ecopia. This is from my own homebrew world. The dwarves of Ecopia are a very traditional people. Their belief about death is pretty normal, that it's just a normal thing, but they don't believe in fate. They believe in free will. And they believe in the Allsmith who divinely forged them and created them, and that they all will return to the Allsmith. Their food, art, dress, tradition, all kind of centers around family, centers around their, people, and that's a little bit more subjective because I let my players really inject their own their own sense of individuality in the world building process. But from a power and leadership, they are your traditional monarchy. They have a traditional family structure and traditional value and ethics, right? Very Lord of the Rings inspired dwarves, okay? So when folks kind of start to play as a dwarf, they know, oh, okay, this is what I should expect of the world. However, as a player, you don't have to do that. You can make your own path. And that's what the beautiful part about this is that when you give your players this power and you give them this choice, they will feel more empowered to do the things that they want to do in your world. So that's why we want to build cultures this way. This is why we want to do and follow this plan. So with that being said, there are 3 pillars of a distinct culture, right? So when designing a new civilization or race, especially if you want to homebrew something, focus on 3 things. Let these be your anchors. Number 1, environment. That is such a big thing. Where people live shapes how they think and behave. Cultures born in a desert, they're going to value water and hospitality, okay? Mountain people might value endurance and tradition, as well as loyalty. And a coastal society might revolve around trade and migration, right? They may be more progressive because it's a trade route. New people, new cultures, new ways of life are passing through. So they need to be open to that, right? So you got to ask yourself, what does survival look like here? What are the resources that define wealth in this environment? And then what myths explain the dangers of that land? The second anchor that we want to focus on is the history. Every culture remembers something, often imperfectly, but they remember it. That collective memory drives their identity. So, ask yourself in your world building process, what event united or divided this people? What trauma do they still carry? Who were their heroes and what do they represent today? So when you give a culture a historical scar, so to speak, it will suddenly feel real. And this is where you can invite the players into the homebrew world building process, right? If a player is representing this area, have them ask them these questions and have them respond in kind. Have them respond with these answers, and then you can kind of flesh it out from there. The third anchor that I want you to think about is their worldview. This is how your culture explains the unseen. So what do they believe about death? Do they believe the world is ordered or chaotic? And then do they see themselves as chosen people, cursed people, or just forgotten? That worldview will tell you what they fear and then what they'll fight for. So again, culture is shaped by environment, memory, and meaning, right? Environment, history, and worldview. To make your culture feel distinct at the table, though, here's where the storytelling side comes in. You don't need a lore book, but you do need touch points your players can experience, right? So there are 4 ways to really make your culture feel distinct at your table. And it's going to be language and expression, right? So think about phrases and idioms and greetings that reflect their worldview. So in Spanish culture, we say adios for goodbye. But the meaning and the root of that came from go with God. Adios, to God. Or, go with God, be with God. So that phrase reflects the worldview of the Spanish people, which was Christian and Catholic based, really. That's just what it was. So in the same thought process, think about maybe the people worship rebirth in your homebrew world, and they may say, may your shadow find you in the next life, right? Or like a very shortened, like, may you be blessed in the next life or something like that. I don't know. But that little cultural, specific, unique greeting or idioms are going to reflect their worldview and make it so much more real. The second thing that makes your culture feel distinct at the table is food in daily life. That just shows the ordinary, which is colorful. A culture that eats a particular type of food is going to really show what the everyday life is, right? So let's say a culture that eats a lot of smoked fish or smoked meats with root vegetables, they're going to probably do that because they live in a colder, harsher environment, right? There's no opportunity to grow wild, crazy fruit and vegetables and grilling meats, because you're not going to start a fire in the cold. You're going to smoke to preserve all your food, or your meats at least. And it may just be more grounded in that colder, harsher environment where feasts are rare, but when they feast, they go crazy, right? So that's going to be reflective of something. Versus a tropical area, it may seem like they're feasting every day when in reality, they're not. That's just normal way of life because there's an abundance of food. The third distinction at your table is going to be symbolism. Lots of different colors, tattoos, and jewelry, and even architecture. Those all communicate values. A society obsessed with, let's say, purity and chastity might build white spires. One obsessed with legacy might engrave their ancestors' names on their doors. And you might see a complete list of names of family members on the door. And they may preserve that door with a ferocity unknown to the players. You may have a people very similar to the Pacific Island nations like Samoa, the Maori people, the Hawaiian people, and so on and so forth, that have very specific and symbolic meanings to their tattoos. Or on the flip side of it, you may have a subsect of culture that tattoos are representative of criminal activities. So think Russian Bratva, think all these other gangs and mafias that incorporate tattooing into their subsect of culture. You might want to think about that as well. That symbolism is so important. And then lastly, conflict and tension. This really makes your table feel distinct because most believable societies aren't perfect. Actually, all believable societies aren't perfect. They have contradictions, right? Remember in our own history, the horrible atrocity of slavery. However, we were a democratic republic in the U.S. and we practiced slavery. It just is what it is. If you have a pacifist religion, maybe they have a violent past, right? These tensions make culture complex and memorable and allows your players to work through that part of the story. However, there is a fine line between being inspired by and copying cultures. So let's talk about avoiding stereotypes and clichés. And here's how to stay authentic and respectful. There's 4 ways that I would implement this. You can blend influences. You can avoid single trait cultures. You can ask yourself, why do they believe this? And then obviously show contradictions. Number 1, blending influences. You can take inspiration from multiple sources. You can combine the Mongolian steppe tradition with the Byzantine Empire's bureaucracy, for example, right? And make a people. I combined the Anglo-Saxon people with the Mongolian steppe traditions to make, in my homebrew world, they're called the Davor. They are people of the steppe. They have a beautiful, rich culture, and their biggest thing is the worship and breeding of these magnificent creatures. But they're beautiful warriors, beautiful poets, and artisans. So I blended 2 different things that influenced me culturally and made something unique. From there, avoid the single trait culture, right? Not all dwarves are miners. Not all elves are mystical. Give people some diversity, some internal diversity, different opinions, castes, subgroups. Maybe there are dwarves who are artisans. Maybe there are elves who are smiths, right? That's very atypical. Tolkien did an amazing job at this, where there are dwarven smiths, elven smiths, dwarven poets, elven poets. You catch what I'm seeing here, right? There is all sorts of beautiful blendedness of the culture. And it's not just a single trait. They're not just known for one thing. From there, ask yourself, why do they believe this? Right? Cultures exist for a reason. They have superstitions, taboos, and art all come from survival or meaning. So root them in logic. And then lastly, it's okay to show contradictions. A society can value freedom, but still cling to some rigid customs. Realism lives in tension. Again, good world building doesn't imitate, but it does integrate. Every world builder dreams of creating societies that feel alive. They're full of voices, conflicts, and identity. But the truth is, you don't need thousands of words to do it. You just need to show what your cultures care about, what they value, what they fear, and what they believe about the world. Because in the end, that's what players remember. They don't remember the names or the costumes, but they remember the ideas behind them. If you want a printable version and some roll tables that would actually help you with this world building part of the process, check us out on Patreon. Until next time, though, keep creating, keep refining, make your worlds worth exploring, be kind and compassionate to one another, and as always, keep gaming.